We're going looking at this Void Spirit who completely dominates his lane and ends up having this spectacular game at the start. And we're going to be looking at mainly the first 10-15 minutes of the match. Now straight away what he decides to do is block the creep wave. He also has his courier sending out an item instantly at the very start. The goal of pushing the creep wave here, which is kind of the important part, is that he reaches level 2 early. This can't be possible if Storm denies one creep, so it's very important that the creeps don't get denied here, even if you miss one last hit. Now he ends up also maximizing the damage there by body blocking the Storm as well while he's running away. So using those first two spells he's leveled up together is going to be what you'll see happening again and again. So next time now when he's going to go on Storm again here, he's going to use the two spells together rather than just one at like a random time than the other. Now because Storm has very little health and mana at the moment, he ends up having to buy a salve to sustain in this lane, and a lot of the reason why that health has to come out is because he's using shared tangos, and the very first interaction we saw at the start of the laning stage has caused Storm to have to buy that. But this salve cancelling has caused a huge disturbance of Storm's economy. For if we have a look over at Storm's items now, he's bought another salve here that's coming out in the courier, and he's like over 400 gold off of a bottle, which is usually the early item that Storm wants to rush. But we end up seeing his mana is so low. How is he going to sustain in this lane? It looks horrible from Storm Spirit's perspective. So because now Storm has had such like a weak impact in this lane, he can't spam out his remnant as often as possible, and Void Spirit on the other hand has now picked up a bottle, and he can end up keep going in and keep spamming his spells. And pretty much when Storm is feared there, he denies the creeps, and the idea is to try and keep Storm behind. This Void Spirit just kind of knows his limits on this Storm, that he's not going to be able to get a kill, mainly because the Storm has a Fairy Fire attached, and now Storm has also bought his salve. This time the Storm is pretty smart not to get his salve cancelled. So if you're on dire side and you need to use tangos, one of the best places to use trees is over here, mainly because it's going to be the closest place back to mid lane, and it's very fast to regen back up, especially if you don't have any iron branches left. Whereas on the Radiant side, it's a lot easier, as you see the trees are very plentiful near the stairs. So we have yet another courier flown out here, and he gets a mango plus boots of speed. Now he ends up getting one of the best runes in the game at this point in the game, which is a DD. Now Pango did show mid, but Pango has kind of disappeared. That's why he's not really going in or playing aggressive. He waits a little bit. Then Storm kind of just ends up getting caught here by the two spells, something similar to what we've seen before. Now we're going to slow down here and we have a look at the circle that he's selecting. So Storm can see every time he changes the circle that he's positioning to, and the Void Spirit is actually repositioning which circle he's going to jump to, and pretty much can, kind of outplay the Storm like this. Now he ends up doing this all throughout the rest of the parts of the game. It isn't just here at the laning stage, so that is something to take into account. Now when Storm respawns, he actually makes kind of like a small mistake here. He ends up denying the range creep here, and he goes in on Storm because he's level 6 and Storm is now only level 4, which seemingly is a big advantage, but he ends up getting Vortex pulled under the tower, and pretty much that stun ended up costing him a huge amount of damage here. But because it's Void Spirit and he has a bottle, he's able to regenerate back up from this really well. He gets both of the bounty runes. Luckily his teammates are working together to help him communicate this. Now he ends up spending a good bit of time here on bottom, but very quickly he ends up teleporting back to mid. He realizes maybe he walked through an observer ward, or the enemy just know that he's coming. It's kind of a very predictable play. Now here again on level 6, he ends up having an advantage over the Storm, who hasn't hit level 6 yet. Now he ends up getting pulled in, and now Storm's defensive mechanic, which is the stun, and his remnant is already used, and pretty much what's happening is that he's trying to get Storm to expend all of his mana, and he's heavily prioritizing the power runes pretty much every 2 minutes, and this is kind of an essential part of like some of these more fighting orientated mid heroes like Void Spirit. Now he ends up jumping in on Storm and doing some damage here. Storm responds back. Now Storm has hit level 6 at this point, and pretty much the Void Spirit ends up he doesn't have any way to dodge Storm's spells, but really just trying to bait out as much mana as possible here. Now, one of the important things when you are diving under a tower is not to do an attack command onto the hero, because otherwise you'd end up aggroing the tower and your dive will end up failing. So it ends up being a pretty easy to hit his spells because of the order which he uses. I mean, he ends up taunting the Storm Spirit first and then uses the Disalamilate, the Circle Yoke, next. So here it ends up being a pretty nice dodge onto Pango's Swashbuckle, gets a bounty rune at the same time and healing up, and he ends up being able to get out here with his ultimate again. So pretty much being able to like do this ends up wasting a lot of time on the enemy team. Like the IO is teleported in, the two supports are there, and meanwhile your offlaner is going to get a great time. He ends up even dodging Storm's ultimate damage there. So that's also a nice little trick that you could do for heroes that are going to be jumping out, especially something like Storm's animation that happens quite a long time. So coming up to 8 minutes here again, he ends up being low mana. He prioritizes the power rune. He ends up chasing after the Pango. So here we end up seeing it with his item build. He ends up going for his second spell and maxing that out, and pretty much the reason why is because it has massive nuke damage. It's 340 damage, and if we think about some spell like Lion's Finger, which is his ultimate, does 600 damage. So his second spell is essentially like an AoE finger, but like half a finger. So like you're half a finger deep, but the girth is massive. So now he walks back to the fountain when he gets his Ewels, fills back up on mana, and pretty much wants to go straight into the Pango here. And you end up noticing that how he uses ultimate is kind of like a blink dagger to jump in. When he uses the Ewels, he can very easily taunt and also get this big nuke damage back on top of it, and always guarantees that he's going to hit this nuke, and he can finish him off with the second charge of his ultimate pretty easily. So you have a huge amount of escape, and you can commit to really far positions if you have 2 charges of your ultimate on this hero. So as we saw earlier, the supports were chasing after Void Spirit, wasting a lot of time, and this actually caused Sven to actually have a much harder time in the laning stage. And now Sven is jungling, so he ends up being able to jump after the Sven here, get the taunt off. The taunt can also be used to help set up the Clockwork's hookshot if you wanted to. There's a bunch of different ways you can combo these things together as well. They can work out really nice. Now, they're also managing to camp on top of this bounty rune, which ends up capitalizing upon the the extra mana regen that the Void Spirit has, as well as that he got this really nice neutral item that just gives him more mana to allow him keep up this pace even more. And like, this is pretty miserable if you're this position 4 Pango. You're level 4 and you're up against a level 9 Void Spirit. How can you really do anything? So the Void Spirit gets an arcane rune, and he ends up walking up and down the river here. Now he spends a good bit of time just walking up and down through here, but the enemy have vision at the other side of the river. They actually have 2 wards in this location, and no one is to be found. So he ends up ditching this plan of walking through the river and goes bottom for an infest kill. So they infest in, they jump in on the Sven here, and they pretty much just like spam all the nukes on him. Now he ends up using the IO here as well, and he's trying to give the kill away to the Lifestealer so the Lifestealer can get his items quicker, because you're better off to have the farm distributed a little bit better. Because if you have a huge amount of kills on one hero, like the Void Spirit currently has 7, you don't necessarily need that extra one, and that's better to distribute it, something like your carry. So here's another example of how Void Spirit ends up using his ultimate pretty much like a blink dagger. So if we have a look at the cast range of Ewels, it's pretty small, but the cast range of its ultimate is kind of the same. But we end up, if we use the 2 together, we pretty much get like a double cast range Ewels. And when Storm ends up going for a last hit, we end up getting really fast initiation that's very hard to react against, and it's almost impossible to cancel the Void Spirit's combo once he starts like getting the Ewels off. So pretty much the Void Spirit is very hard to kill at this point. And also if we look at his item choice, Bind Boots of Travel, this is pretty much so he can kind of punish anyone who decides to push on the side lanes or respond back to IO relocate. So this is a pretty good item, and usually is picked up when you're very far ahead to punish the enemy coming back into the game. So hopefully you enjoyed this type of video. If you want to see more Dota content like this, make sure you subscribe.